Today, our text comes from Psalm 29. I invite you to read along with me. Ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The glory of God thunders. The Lord over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon to skip like a calf and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth and strips the forest bare. And in his temple all cry, Glory. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as king forever. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. Well, some folks in our church may have noticed that I wear glasses more and more as time goes on. Things are becoming increasingly fuzzy and difficult to read, and small print has become virtually unreadable for me. And so glasses bring into sharp focus what I have begun to lose sight of, literally. It helps me see things that I've lost sight of. Our text today, Psalm 29, is going to serve a similar purpose. It's going to bring an aspect of God into sharp focus, into our view, that I fear that as a kind of a modern Western culture, we have lost sight of. And that is his awesome glory. Now, God's glory is a major theme in the Bible, and it's referenced hundreds of times, and we've probably heard it over and over and over again, and we've sung about it. But what is it exactly? Well, let's start with a definition. The glory of God refers to the infinite weight of his beauty, worth, and majesty. The glory of God refers to the infinite weight of his beauty, worth, and majesty. So, let's take a moment and think about some of the things we know about God and how they all kind of contribute to his glory. So some of the attributes of God are that he is self-existent. So God needs no one or no thing to come into being or to live. He just does. And he's eternal. He has no beginning. He has no end. He cannot be destroyed. He's holy. He is perfect in every way. Morally, he is without blemish, without corruption. He is all-knowing. There is nothing hidden from him. He knows and understands everything throughout eternity. He is all-present. There is not a square inch of this universe that God does not know about and see and dwell in. He is all powerful. He is not limited in anything that he can do. He is perfectly just. He knows right and wrong and judges perfectly in all things. His morality is impeccable. He's though endlessly gracious. He reaches out to us from this bottomless well of grace and goodness and kindness. At the same time, he's a consuming fire of wrath who does not leave guilty unpunished or let the wicked get off the hook. But he also is love. He is the embodiment of love. He just doesn't have a loving heart. He is love. All love proceeds from him. So we think about all these things. Let's take them all together. All these quality of God's. And when we kind of put them into one giant lump and think about the totality of who God is, we begin to get a grasp on what we mean by the weight the weight of his beauty and his worth and his majesty. If we want to make this concept even easier to understand, maybe if we were trying to explain it to a child, we might say that God's glory refers to his greatness or even his bigness. We're talking about God's bigness, his awesome bigness. I don't know if you would remember the lyrics to the song, "My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. The mountains are his, the rivers are his, the skies are his handiwork too." All right? Even though that is a child's song, it's actually a pretty good statement. It's a pretty accurate statement about God's glory or his bigness. My God is so big, so strong, so mighty. So that maybe help us understand a little bit more about God's glory. And as that song suggests, as does David in Psalm 19, one way that we can begin to comprehend and see God's glory is by looking up into the sky. So it's not just a theoretical thing, God's glory. It exists for us to observe. So let's take a look at how the heavens declare the glory of God. First, just by their vastness, by their sheer size. The scale of the cosmos speaks to the immensity of God's power. The known universe, what is observable, is 93 billion light years across. Now, it may be much larger than that. It may be infinite. We don't know, but what we can see, and I don't know how we can see that far, but 93 billion light years across. Now, within this observable universe, there are 200 trillion galaxies. 200 trillion galaxies. And within each of these galaxies, there's somewhere between 100 to 400 billion stars. So, I can't even conceive of these numbers. It's like, there's like 20, 30 zeros after it. So kind of numbers we don't even ever have names for. One way that I had recently seen it described was if the Earth and all its size represented the observable known universe. Earth, the actual Earth we live on, would be less than a speck of sand, less than a grain of sand. So we just think of how big Earth is and how long it takes to get places and all that, and yet it's nothing compared to the totality of what is God has made. But it's not just the size, it's also the order and precision of the universe, the movement of the stars and planets and seasons and the laws of physics that govern them all reflects a God who has unimaginable wisdom, and his order and his design are just mind-blowing, right? We can't even conceive of all of it, the size and how it works so beautifully together. And the amazing thing, on top of all this, is what the Bible says is all of this came into existence from nothing in an instant, all by the Lord just speaking a word and like boom, and it happened, right? And when we think about that, we can look up into the skies and the size and the beauty and the wonder, and we start to get a sense of like the glory of God. That's a kind of more an experiential sense of the glory of God. But we can see God's glory in other ways too. Throughout the Old Testament, there are numerous examples of kind of visible and tangible expressions of God's glory. One of them is given to us in Psalm 29, which I just read. And we're not familiar with the ancient geography so much of the Middle East as we could be. But what we see in Psalm 29, what I read, was about this storm, this raging storm, and it starts in the Mediterranean over the waters, and it moves into Israel, it hits the land, and then it drops and it turns south. So It's God's glory is depicted as this really big storm. And the storm is called God's voice. And it says God's voice throughout Psalm 29. It thunders. It's powerful. It's full of majesty. It breaks the cedars. It flashes flames of fire. It shakes the wilderness. It strips the forest bare. And then as the storm then descends down and it hits Jerusalem, it says all in the temple cry, glory, like the awesome power of God. They see it in just the awesomeness of it all. They just see it and it's like, this is the Lord. And they cry glory. And just like in the storm, whenever God's glory is revealed in the Old Testament, it's always done in a very unforgettable and fearful way. We can think of a glory cloud descending over Mount Sinai in Exodus. And when that happens and the glory descends, everybody but Moses kind of goes running and screaming in the other direction. Like God is just, his presence, his glory is just too much for people to handle. And also we see that the same kind of glory cloud descend in the tabernacle and later the temple. And it's just unapproachable. Like this cloud of God's glory, it radiates, but there's weight to the light. Like it's like this heavy light that you just can't bear to be in. And this is a terrible illustration, and I'll just say right up front, it's very Hollywood, and it's not biblically accurate really at all. But if you think of the closing scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, if you're familiar with it, they open up the ark and kind of everybody dies, and there's this great swirling power of God's wrath and justice. Even though it's like very Hollywood, it does do a pretty good job of communicating the overwhelming power and the unapproachable presence and just the awesome nature of God's glory. But God's glory isn't just something in the Old Testament, it's in the New Testament too. It's throughout the whole Bible. But when we see God's glory in the New Testament, we see it in the most inconceivable manner. That the infinite glory of God, the bigness of God that we would see in the storms and the glory clouds and the creation, all that, it is smashed down. The bigness of God is smashed down and packed into a human body. Hebrews 1:1-3. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in the last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and upholds the universe by the word of his power. This is an unbelievable statement here that God's glory has been, again, compressed down, packed down, smashed down into a person, and that is Jesus. Jesus is the physical embodiment of God's glory. We also read this same thing in John chapter 1, verse 14. The text says, and the Word, the essence of God, Jesus, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as of only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. Jesus, being the embodiment of the glory of God, demonstrates his glory throughout the Gospels. He gives sight to the blind. He gives hearing to the deaf, speech to the mute. He makes the paralyzed walk. He multiplies food to feed tens of thousands. He yells into the wind and calms the storm. He turns water into wine. He walks on water. He calls people out of the grave and restores them to life. And of course, Jesus in his own resurrection, the grave, death was no match for his glory, which would overcome that. And now that's in the Gospels. That's in Jesus' earthly body, we see this glory revealed. But when we get to the book of Revelation, there's even more epic descriptions of Jesus where his glory is revealed. Jesus isn't so much like contained in a human body. We're seeing him really as he is. And there he is hailed as King of Kings and Lord of Lords over all of heaven. In Revelation 1, we were told he's got eyes that have flames of fire. His voice thunders like mighty ocean waves. His face is like the sun in all its brilliance. And heaven is just spilling out in the radiance of the glory of the Lord. And in Revelation 5, we see how heaven, these angelic beings, heavenly beings, respond to this. And John tells us as he goes, I looked again and I heard the voices of thousands and millions of angels around the throne and of the living beings and the elders. And they sang in a mighty chorus, worthy is the Lamb who was slaughtered to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and glory and honor and glory and blessing. And then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea, and they sang, blessing and honor and glory and power to belong to the one sitting on the throne and to the Lamb forever and ever. And so we see here, again, this theme of glory goes all the way from Genesis 1:1 in creation, all the way to the end in Revelation. And Jesus is the embodiment of that glory, and Jesus is unrivaled. He is unequaled. He is the subject of all worship and all glory, for all ages. Which leads me to kind of where I'm trying to get to today. Because in light of this, in light of all of the things we've talked about, something strange and unexpected has happened. In time, we have lost sight of the weight of God's glory. We have lost sight of his bigness. And I think this is true both inside and outside the church. And it's been going on for some time. Again, we've lost sight of this. And today I'm hoping that we can maybe put some glasses on and recapture that thing. So as I said, this has been going on for some time, this reduction or this diminishment of the glory of God. A.W. Tozer wrote a really tremendous book called The Knowledge of the Holy, and he wrote it back in 1961. And this is the introduction, and he tells why he wrote this book, which really points us to God's glory. He says, the message of this book is called forth by a condition which has existed in the church for some years and is steadily growing worse. I refer to the loss of the concept of majesty from the popular religious mind. The church has surrendered the once lofty concept of God and has substituted for one so low, so ignoble, as to be utterly unworthy of thinking, worshiping men. It is my opinion that the Christian conception of God's current in these middle years of the 20th century is so decadent as to be utterly beneath the dignity of the Most High God, and to actually constitute for professed believers something amounting to a moral calamity. Now again, this is back in 1961, Tozer made this comment, and in the 54 years since this was written, I think the idea of the glory of God, the majesty, the weight of who he is, it continues to disappear from view. And what Tozer described as a moral calamity, I believe, has become a spiritual epidemic. Well, how so? Well, let me tell you, I think of several ways where I think this has happened. First, we have turned God into our personal assistant. God is viewed primarily as someone who helps us achieve our goals, success and health and happiness, and God's awesome power is really primarily used to serve our purposes. And as a result, God has become small, useful, and optional, like a cosmic therapist or genie, and we can call him if we're not getting things to go how we want on our own. Second, we treat God casually. God is ignored, he is trifled, he's dismissed as a fairy tale, he's mocked, he's become a punchline in a way that others who had known God in history would think it's inconceivable how God is, our buddy and our pal. And as a result, reverence and awe and what we'd say the fear of God, it's lost. And we become very comfortable with him. And God is very accessible to us, but not in a way where he would impose on what we want to do. Third, we've ignored God's justice and wrath. God is seen really only as a God of love. Not a God who ever becomes angry, not a God who ever would judge, but a God who is always affirming. It's like a toothless tiger. A number of years ago, the Kelly Miller Circus came over to Harbor Island here in Grand Haven, and my family went to go see it. And one of the acts, the big feature act, was a kind of lion tamer. And the lions he had were so old and so drugged up that when they would, kind of crack the whip, it would take them 2 or 3 seconds to realize what had happened, and they'd slowly go from one little stand to another. And kind of that's what has become of the Lion of Judah. There is no fear of God. He has become domesticated, and sin is minimized, and God's grace is become a cheap thing. 4, we've given God a makeover in our image. And God has been remade culturally to fit modern sensibilities, affirming our preferences, our political views, or our moral standards. And as a result, we no longer bow to him. Rather, we expect God to endorse what we believe is true and what we like and what we want. 5th, we've replaced God with self as the center of reality. Now, this is all of sin nature kind of in a nutshell, but we have exalted self above God, and rather than ascribe God the glory due him, we chase after our own. We want to make a name for ourselves more than recognizing who God is. And so God becomes irrelevant, right? He's just a spiritual accessory if we want to use him, but we're the star of the show. We're the center of reality. 6, we have neglected God's word. Scripture is no longer authoritative. It's treated as something that is outdated, it's optional, and if you want, you can take bits and pieces and they can become like inspirational slogans for you. And so God's voice, the voice that stripped the forest bare and shattered the oaks, it's drowned out now just by kind of just cultural noise and whatever happens to be kind of popular at the moment, whatever we're being told to believe. And then finally, 7th, worship has become horizontal. And what I mean by that is worship is now more thought of in terms of what we get from it, how much we like it, and what it does for us, rather than it being primarily about being rooted in like ascribing God's worth. It's become much more about me, and also not just the people who are kind of in the audience, but the people up front can often try to seek glory and attention for themselves. And so the result is whether you're up front or you're in the congregation, what we're seeking is kind of it's a very horizontal kind of transaction, and glory never rises above the ceiling. And so kind of there's been this hijacking of worship. So the result of this is twofold. First, God is not receiving the glory he is due. He is being robbed of what is rightfully his. And we can see in society, God is becoming increasingly kind of pushed to the margins. At least in our perception, God is being pushed to the margins. And so that in itself is just wrong, right? I mean, we can just say that in itself is a real problem. But maybe more immediate to us is this idea that when God's glory is minimized, when it's reduced, when it's, we lose sight of it, then we miss out on the very thing we're created for. We miss out on the best parts of life because you and I, we were made to know God's glory and live in it. All right? That's really kind of where this message, I think, has to stick. That you and I, we were made to know God's glory and live in it. We were created in God's image, which means, among other things, we have been given the capacity to understand God's glory, to perceive it, and not just to perceive it, but to delight in it. To delight in the radiance of his glory and to live in the wonder and the awe and the majesty and the power of it all. We were meant to just take great joy in that. This is what we were made for. This is the essence of being human. I recently had a conversation with someone, and they have been a Christian for a long time, but recently they've been on a real spiritual high, and they were describing their experience to me, and they didn't have the right words for it, but they were finally living in the light of the glory of God. Like God was so now center, and they were just so enjoying it and delighting in it and reveling in it. And it was just, even though their life is not, from circumstantially speaking, it's not going in great, they're happier and more fulfilled than they have been at any time before because they are living and delighting in the glory of God, in his being, in his essence, in his presence. So what does that mean for us? What do we do? Well, the answer comes to us right in Psalm 29, verse 2. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. That's what we should do. We should be ascribing to God the glory that is due him. So how do we do that? Let's just break that down and wrap up by breaking it down into a couple things. Where do we begin? First, we need to remember how small we are, right? We won't ever appreciate how big God is until we first realize how small we are. And so we need to just take into account our frailty, our mortality, how short our life in this world is, and the realization of our sin and our moral corruption and, how flawed we really are. And with that, taking into account that this is God's world and it exists for his purposes. And so how foolish and inconsequential it is for me to chase after my own glory, right? Like, if you spend your whole life chasing after your own glory, like you're never going to experience what God has really made you for and built you for, which is to live for his glory and enjoy his glory. So first, I think we just got to remember how little we are, certainly in comparison to God. And that brings us to the second thing, to remember how big God is. Randy Bremer, who's a retired pastor, now part of our church family, when he was a pastor at another church, and I would call him, and if he wasn't there, his voice machine would say, "Hi, this is Randy Bremer. I'm not here right now. I'm meditating on the glory of God. So leave a message, and I'll get back to you." And I thought it was, humorous but if you know Randy, it's very possible he was meditating on the glory of God and just thinking about who God is and how great and wonderful and how eternal and holy and all knowing and all powerful, all the things we talked about at the very beginning. And I just wonder, do we take time to do this? In our schedules, in our very busy schedules, when are we taking time to think about the bigness of God? Whether it's in his word or in times of just worshiping him or appreciating him in his stunning creation. When are we taking time just to marvel at his character? And I think this would be part of just what we do, just this daily praise, whether it's a time we schedule or unscheduled, where we just break out in wonder. And as Randy says, we just meditate and we just chew on and contemplate how awesome God is, how big God is. And then finally, I think we need to develop a vertical mindset. And by that, I mean, we give God glory by devoting our life to Him. We live with kind of eyes up to live with the Lord, live for the Lord. And so our pursuit of God and our experience of God's glory isn't just relegated to Sunday mornings or to like my quiet time, but all of it. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 10 shows the totality of this. He writes, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God." I mean, he goes down like when you eat, when you drink, everything, even the most basic, mundane survival tasks, when you do it in with the glory of God in mind. And so it's a way of just saying to the Lord, like, this life, it is given for you every day and in every way. I am keeping you. My thoughts are on you and your ways. And I'm going to live in such a way that honors and reflects that. And so the encouragement here is when you do that, that joy and wonder that this person I just mentioned, like, that becomes yours. Like, you really step into this kind of new way of living. But there's even more. And this is the best part, is that we are transformed by God's glory and we reflect it. As we ascribe to God the glory, we start to be changed by it. In the Old Testament, Moses, he would spend time with God on top of Mount Sinai in this glory cloud, and his face would start to glow so much so that when he would come down and talk to people, he had to put a veil and put a sheet over his head because he was reflecting God's glory so much that it was blinding. It was hard for people to look at him. And when we live with and for Jesus Christ, the same thing can happen to us. Listen to what Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 3. He says, "But whenever someone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. So all of us who have had that veil removed can see and reflect the glory of the Lord. And the Lord, who is the Spirit, makes us more and more like Him as we are changed into His glorious image." Isn't this astounding? I mean, I hope you're just like, really? Like, this is unbelievable. That the glory we ascribe to Jesus actually changes us. We reflect it, but then as we reflect it, we're actually becoming more like Jesus. We're changed into the image of His glory. And I would say this is where life just gets so good. I mean, this is where you're just living at just a completely different level in the Christian life. And I think this is what God has called us to. This is the overflowing, abundant life that we can have in Christ. And as good as that is, even as good as we get it on this in this life, it's even just pointing towards what is going to be our ultimate end, the end state, where God's glory is going to cover a renewed creation. And in this new creation, there won't even be the sun, because God's glory will radiate and light everything exists. And that is heaven. That is the experience of heaven, of living in the unfiltered glory of Christ and the joy and the peace that comes in that. That is what we're made for, and hopefully that's what we're after. And I don't know about you. I don't want to wait until I die to experience that. Like, I want that now, as much as I can get. And so what we're going to do as a church family, and I pray that we all commit ourselves to this, is to reclaim this task of ascribing to the Lord, the glory due his name. And as we do so, we find ourselves transformed from everlasting to everlasting. Amen.